They say that all publicity is good publicity, and for some people, any attention is a good thing. I was originally going to label this attention-grabbing watches, but I think conversation starter is a far better way of contextualizing them. To define what I mean, we're talking about watches that if someone sees it on your wrist, they're likely to ask questions about it. To take that a step further, we're not talking about watch aficionados asking questions about something tasteful you're wearing. We're talking about members of the general public here. However, just because they might be fuel to start a conversation does not mean that these pieces are not horologically interesting to own in and of themselves. The reason that the watch is a conversation starter isn't specific. It could be the colour, the movement, the way it tells the time, the list goes on. With that rather vague criteria set, let's look at the rules for the video. Each watch featured has to, at least in my opinion, be a conversation starter. Each watch must be available below the $1,000 price point, and for the sake of variety, each brand can only feature once on the list. I will also just add that there are plenty of gimmick pieces out there that look like watches but don't actually tell the time. I won't be featuring any of those here. With all that said, let's get into the video. Yes, I own one of these. Yes, I can confirm that it gets people talking, though I will also admit that sometimes I think they might be talking about you rather than talking to you. As the name of the watch suggests, the whole thing detaches from the wrist mount and it turns into a little robot action figure with posable limbs which still displays the time in a tiny window on its chest. It's a tacky little toy really, but it is a bit of fun, costs next to nothing, and could potentially be an avenue for trying to get younger children interested in horology or learning the time. It could also just be a fun little talking point to sit alongside, or in my case, on top of, your watch collection. Last month, I made a video looking at watches that tell the time in unconventional ways. The Magneto Jupiter didn't quite fit into that category for me, as actually the hours and minutes are laid out on the dial in quite an intuitive fashion. However, that doesn't quite do this concept justice. Effectively, magnets rotate around to indicate the hours and the minutes, with ball bearings roaming loosely within two grooves around the dial, one for the hours and one for the minutes. If you knock them loose, they will travel at will, only reattaching to the magnets to tell the time again once they are close to them. So think of this as a combination between a fidget toy and a watch. Definitely a model that's going to get people talking though. If you want to look at a wide selection of talking point pieces that are all unusual in the way that they look or tell the time, Tokyoflash is the best single destination that I can recommend. I went there thinking I might look to feature either one of their Nixie tube models or a retro LED model, but I settled on the Rotar instead. It's a lot smaller than the Nixie offering, while still providing a pretty unconventional and conversation starting method of delivering the time. The good news here as a prospective buyer is that if you don't like any of these three suggestions I've given you, I can promise you there are plenty more that might take your fancy on the website. This might have to go down as one of the most unoriginal watch design ideas I've ever seen. But as far as talking point pieces goes, it's got a very unique feature that still nets it a spot on this list. I say unique, but then another rabbit hole opens up. The Frank Miura King Macau is essentially the same watch and is available for around half the price. Whereas the Törner Labs model has been designed to mimic a Richard Mille, The Frank Muir is clearly a spin-off on Frank Muller. A total mess of homagery going on here. The dice and the design are certain to start conversations. I'm just not sure they're necessarily conversations you want to have. You may have noticed that, unlike my other videos, there are quotation marks around the best part of the title of this one. This watch is definitely good for starting a conversation, but I won't pretend it's anywhere near close to being the best at being a watch. This could actually have featured in my video on art watches last week, and for full disclosure, I'm not entirely sure if Project's watches have gone bust or not. Their website just takes you to a giant logo. If that is the case, you're going to be hunting on the second-hand market for a piece like breakfast. I think it's quite a dangerous idea for a watch because it actually makes me hungry just seeing it. In truth, $200 is a lot to ask for a basic quartz watch, so you've really got to buy into the idea of this not only being an artistic piece, but also having value in terms of the attention it garners in starting conversations. This is perhaps the most subtle entry onto the list, because it doesn't really become a talking point piece until you actually see someone using it in action. On wrist at a distance, it merely looks like a slightly chunky dress watch. Essentially, this is a spin. Yes, that was a pun. Yes, you can cringe. On JLC's iconic Reverso, but with a much more accessible price point. Now, clearly the engineering is nowhere near its inspiration, and this is a quartz model. But with no second hand to give it away, and technically no back of the watch anyway, there isn't really much being lost there. As an added bonus to being an interesting piece, having two watch faces also allows you to track multiple time zones if you wish, as well as being able to match the piece to a wider variety of outfits and occasions. Perhaps it's just me, but when I was a kid, I thought this watch was the coolest thing ever. They weren't exactly commonplace, and I only ever saw one in person, but I was desperate to understand how it worked and what the picture quality was like. We live in an age now where if you saw someone watching video on their watch, the most you might do is question why they aren't just looking at it on their phone. Smartwatches are incredibly uniform, homogeneous, and in my opinion, outright boring. However, if you saw one of these vintage TV watches on someone's wrist, you'd definitely have some questions. Sure, the reality is actually pretty rubbish, but it's ambitious for its day and somehow still has more style to it than any smartwatch could possibly hope to muster. Anyone with a keen interest in watches will have been waiting for a Xeric model to feature on the list, and their latest offering is definitely something that's going to pique the curiosity of anyone who sees it. The Invertor II is currently available at $550 with a pre-order discount of $200. It's set to ship in April of 2025. So it is maybe a bit cheeky to feature a watch on the list that isn't quite out yet, but it definitely fits the box in terms of being a conversation starter, and making you aware of a $200 discount sounds like decent consumer advice from my standpoint, so I think it's fair to feature it while the offer is still live. As you can probably tell from the images and the name, the premise of the watch is that it's built from back to front, with the movement taking centre stage where the dial would be for your visual pleasure, and the time telling relegated to the bottom window. The colourful rotor also acts as a bit of a pricey fidget spinner, so this model is definitely a good shout out for those of you who get fixated by observing the operation of watch movements. As a general rule, when I feature watches in my videos, I will either only use my own footage or advertising material released by the brand itself. Unfortunately, Mr. Jones Watches has not featured this model in any of their own video footage. So I would encourage you to look up the video by Filipino Time on YouTube if you want to see it in action, as that does a really good job of showcasing exactly why this is a conversation starter. Essentially, the Ferris wheel is some nice background dressing. It doesn't help tell the time, but it constantly rotates, with the idea being that it serves as a reminder for you to enjoy the time you have, before you worry about what the time actually is. It's colourful, it's bright, it's sure to grab some attention, and hopefully spread a little positivity along the way. The talking point here is quite clearly the original handset. They make a lot of use of the dial space compared to regular hands, and in my opinion, in combination with the chunky bezel, that has the effect of making the watch seem a little larger than it actually is, when actually this is only 39mm in diameter, and for me that's a great size, as it means that a lot of people can access it, as it will fit most wrists. While this Parisian offering comes in more expensive than any other piece on the list, it is also a good deal more sensible, refined and wearable on a daily basis, while still ticking the box for being a conversation piece. And it's for that reason that I'm going to award it with my recommendation for the video. So there we have it, what I consider to be the 10 best conversation starter watches that money can buy for under $1,000. This may well be one of the most subjective list videos I've ever produced though, as I'm not only trying to pick out pieces that appeal in some way, shape or form, but also ones that I think would catch the attention of others. As a result, I'm sure there won't be a huge amount of agreement in the comments, so please let me know if you think there are other more deserving pieces that should have featured. With unique lists like this one, I'm also fairly sure there will be entire brands making conversation starter watches that I've never even heard of, let alone overlooked. So again, please let me know. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this.